The Special Fathers Network is thrilled to be sponsored by Rubin Law, a multi-generational law firm dedicated exclusively to serving families raising children with special needs. It's not one thing they do, it's the only thing they do. To find out more, go to rubinlaw.com, RUBIN law.com, or call 847-279-7999 and mention the Special Fathers Network for a free consultation. 847-279-7999, Rubin Law.
My message to anybody who's listening to this conversation is that it will be okay. You will find your way. Your child will find their way. And if you're ever stuck anywhere, find me, and I will do whatever I can to help you get back on track.
That's David Hirsch's guest this week, Alex Lyebelsky. Alex works in corporate recruiting. He and his wife, Tonie, have 2 children, one of whom, Amanda, has mild retardation, autism, ADHD, and Aspergers. We'll hear how Alex came to the U.S. from Russia as a child and how he and Tonie have worked together to raise their 2 girls. That's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Here's our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's hear this fascinating conversation between Alex Lyebelsky and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Alex Lyebelsky of Wheaton, Illinois, who's the father of 2 and works in corporate recruiting. Alex, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
David, likewise, thank you. I'm honored to be here.
You and your wife, Tonie, have been married for 26 years and are the proud parents of Samantha, 21, and older sister Amanda, 23, who has mild retardation, autism, ADHD, and Aspergers. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Where did I grow up? So I grew up in Chicago, but the first 7 years of my life were in Russia. I was born in Vladivostok, which is where my mother and her family's from. She had met my father, who was in the Russian Navy, through her brother, who was in the same unit with my dad. My dad gets invited over for dinner because he lived in Kharkov, which was days away by train back then. And he accepted that invitation, and a year and a half or so later, 2 years, here I am. Shortly after I was born, my dad had finished service there in the Russian Navy, and they moved back to his hometown in what then was and is still part of the Ukraine, Kharkov.
Okay.
So I spent a good part of 7.5, 8 years there.
So from what I remember, you moved to the U.S. at around age 7 or 8,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a younger brother as well, but he's quite a bit younger.
12 years. Also Leo, which sometimes is dangerous, but he was born here in the United States, so he can legally become president. His name's Jerry, and we are really close, 12 years apart, but we've gotten closer over the years. Yeah, I'm really, really blessed to have a great family.
So out of curiosity, what did your dad do while he was working?
Well, my dad actually started working, as you can imagine, back in the day, U.S. or Russia, he started working at a young age. So his very first job was as a tailor, as a helper. As he grew into a young man and developed his skills, he became what is called, how do you call it in English? It's called zakroyщик, which in an American translation would be a cutter. He would cut layers and layers of material. It's a specialty that he, honed over the years. So when he came here to the United States, he brought that trade with him. It took him a little while to land into that field here in the U.S. He was having odd jobs, construction, painting, you name it, he did it. But my dad is now going to be 77. He is a master tailor, the last of the Mohicans. There's actually a special on TV where there's Italian master tailors, but he's a Russian master tailor.
Well, that's fascinating. I don't think I know anybody else who has told me that their dad is a master tailor. So quite impressive.
And he will not let you forget that. He is, you have him work on your suits. He'll look at you and say, I got this. Just take off the jacket. But Dad, you missed a sleeve. I have this. Take off the jacket. So, yeah.
Very cool. So how would you describe your relationship with your dad?
It's an interesting question. Growing up, it was a tough relationship. I lived in Russia the first 7 years of my life, so it was very disciplined. You walked a fine line. You did what Dad said the first time. That discipline carried over into the U.S., where you come to a country that you know no one with no language. And, of course, being an immigrant child, you will become a doctor or a lawyer. That was all I heard for a good part of my life. The one thing I take away from my father being in his shoes now as a father is that we had great talks. He was always accessible, but it was always his way for a good part of my childhood until maybe 18, 19, 20 years of age, that he finally started bending his ear and listening a little bit of my side. But he was always accessible. We would talk for hours sometimes, great stories of his childhood and why it's important to stay true to yourself and have integrity and credibility. And that's all I heard for even to this day. Never lose sight of that. So I appreciate it more now than I did in my, 15, 18, 20 years of age. It really kind of came home when Amanda was born. When I'm holding a special needs baby daughter, I'm like, okay, gosh, it's my turn. So it kind of all came together then.
Well, thank you for sharing. I'm also thinking about other father figure or influences, and I'm wondering what role, if any, your grandfathers played, starting with your dad's dad and then your mom's dad as well.
I was, the first grandchild in the family. So no matter which grandfather was with me, I was Dad's first grandchild, and I'm a boy. So the pressure's on. But I will say that, by default, because I live closer to my dad's dad, he was my consigliere. He was my, big brother, little brother, my, second dad. He and I were inseparable. As I matured and came into my own, he would slowly come to me then for advice, right? But he would always be that shoulder that you can lean on any time of day. And when we would be together, which was often, it was very special. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about him. Knowing my grandfather, Sam, was knowing a true gentleman that just took attention to his family. His children were just precious to him, and the relationship that he shared with them till, unfortunately we lost him early due to a sudden death, but I can talk about him for hours. But he was, to this day, I think about him like it was yesterday. He's just an incredible human being.
From what I remember, he was the one that led the family's move from Russia to the U.S., right?
He did. It's kind of hard to put into words because this is 1975, and I think the plan was in the works for a couple of years. I don't know how he put this trip together, but at that time it was myself, age 7, my mother and father in their early 30s, my father's grandmothers, my grandfather, my grandmother, my uncle, my aunt, all on my father's side. They had a 3-year-old. And my aunt's husband. So that's 9, 10 people all came here. I can still remember the day that we moved because we lived in big apartment buildings. If you've ever been to Brighton Beach in New York, you have these big apartment buildings. So picture, I think it was 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning, a bus pulls up. And my mom wakes me up and goes, "We're leaving." "Where are we going?" We're leaving. Let's get on this bus. So we all hustled downstairs because this all had to happen very quickly. And whatever you carried with you is what you brought with you. And next thing you know, we're on this bus, and there's dozens of people looking at you through the windows. "Where are you going? What's going on?" I mean, this is Russia 1975. And now that I'm 53, I can actually through watching some history movies and etc., you look back at this saying, how did this ever happen? We went to the train station, got on this train, and, here we are. And it was an incredible move. And it's interesting to reflect back on that because my parents started giving away and selling all their furniture months in advance. So our apartment, which was furnished, all of a sudden went to just a bed and a table and very few minimalistic type of things around. And I'll never forget that night they let me go to sleep in what I was wearing. And I found it to be very odd. They're like, hey, we've had a long day. Forget the pajamas. Just go to bed. But they had a plan. So it took us 3.5 months. It was a 3-4 month journey because we had to stop in Italy to process some paperwork. And of course, I went to English school while everybody worked on processing paperwork. But I could not imagine myself doing that at 33. What my grandfather, who's then 48, give or take, moving little kids and grandmothers and bags of stuff, because if you didn't bring it, there was no FedEx, no UPS. Nobody was shipping you anything. That was it. So literally clothes on your back. Just having this conversation just brings back so much emotion because you think back, you're like, how in the world did they do that? And today, you ask a friend to drive from, Northbrook to your house for dinner, and they're like, oh, come on, man, just so far away. Really? Can't we meet in the middle? I'm just blessed, really. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It's there's a lot of talk about immigration, and I think that to a great extent it's a lot of politics. But I think when you look behind, what is on the surface, there are families, there are real lives, right? And it takes an incredible amount of courage and tenacity and just the willingness to step outside your comfort zone and go someplace you've never been and maybe won't fit in right away. You won't speak the language or have a mastery of the language, and the willingness to say, there's something better, right? There's an opportunity, and somebody's got to take that big step, that big leap of faith. And I just really appreciate you sharing your story. Very inspiring. Alex, I'm wondering if there's anyone else that served as a father figure while you were growing up.
Yes, I was blessed to have 2 uncles. My father's brother, Uncle Al, was always like my big brother, and my aunt's husband, Mike. He's a quiet guy, so he was always a man of few words. But when he did speak and give you advice, it always sat and resonated with me. Not as a father figure, but my aunt was my father, my brother, my sibling. So I've been blessed to have those 3 individuals in my life that were just, to this day, I can recall conversations we've had when I needed them. But beyond that, fast forwarding a little bit to where we are today, I don't think Tonie and I would not be the couple that we are, the parents that we are, the siblings that we are, the children that we are, and hopefully friends that we are, without the support of our extended family, who are just amazing people and are there at any moment. But also the friends that we've built because of Amanda, right? Because of Amanda. Our community and the teachers. We're just so grateful in many ways as a result of that I think combination of where we were as young people, where we are as a married couple, we would not be together today if it wasn't for the values of our family members and the support of everybody that I just mentioned. We're blessed. It just, Tonie and I are blessed to be together because of everybody.
Well, thanks for sharing. So my recollection was that you went to Northern Illinois University, go Huskies, and you studied Russian languages and literature, of all things. What were you thinking? Where was your career going to take you?
Oh, it's interesting. Whenever I meet new people or go to dinner with friends, and I'm always thinking, please don't ask me what my major was, because they all know I'm from Russia. I speak Russian, and here I am. So I really dreamed of working for the government. Well, unbeknownst to me, when I started really applying myself and talking to some of these government agencies, they were going to have nothing to do with me in the mid 80s, being a Soviet immigrant, two uncles, father and grandfather, who were officers in the Russian military. And I didn't mention this, but my mother's father was a high-ranking officer in the Russian Navy. And so when I was talking to the recruiters at the FBI and CIA and all the other field offices, they're like, yeah, that's great, but it's not you will not see anything that is interesting. So I quickly had to make an adjustment and fell into recruiting in HR because my then girlfriend at the time had graduated a semester before me and started working in HR. And I said, oh, this is kind of interesting. I like people like me. And so here I am.
So that's another thing you took away from NIU was not just your undergraduate education, but you met your wife.
Yeah.
Or the woman who would become your wife.
Yeah. Set up on a blind date. It was the best date I've ever had.
I'd like to switch gears and talk about special needs, first on a personal level and then beyond. I know that Amanda's entry into the world was a bit precarious, to say the least, and I'm wondering if you can recall that situation and then how things transpired along with the diagnosis.
Absolutely. I would say that, we were having a dream pregnancy. Everything was coming along nicely. We had our regular checkups and everything about it was great. And right about 7 months, Tonie had called me during lunch and said, hey, I just had lunch and the baby's not as active as it normally is. We didn't know what the sex was at the time. We wanted to be surprised. So I called my doctor and he said, come on in. And the doctor was downtown. So everything was strategically convenient. She says, nothing to worry about. I'll call you when I know what's going on. And she did. And she said, I went to the doctor's office and the heartbeat's kind of not really steady. He says, nothing to worry about, just make your way to the hospital. They'll do better testing than I can do here. It's okay, don't panic. So she took the taxi to the hospital, said, hey, just wrap up your day. You don't have to worry. Everything's fine. Just make your way to the hospital and I'll meet you there. Okay. Wrapped up my day. Made my way over there within an hour and a half or so. I show up to the hospital and they lead me to Tonie's room, and the room was maybe about, 10 by 10, just enough to fit a bed and some equipment. And we're sitting there talking, having a nice conversation. Nurse comes in and says, hey, everything's great. Just relax here for a little bit. We'll keep you under observation. Worst case scenario, you may have to stay here overnight. We're like, cool, everything, we'll play along. She leaves the room, and Tonie and I are just sitting there, continue our conversation. All of a sudden, the monitor went to 0. And we're both looking at each other, and I'm like, hey, listen, can you just adjust that strap around your belly and, maybe put it back on track where it's slipped off? She did. Nothing's happening. So I open the door. I call the nurse. Nurse comes in and tries to adjust the little monitor as well, or the little strap on Tonie's belly, and nothing's happening. Next thing you know, she presses a button. It's code red. People are flying in the room. Sheets are flying off of Tonie. Some guy shoves me in the corner because I started asking questions. He goes, stay in the corner, just be quiet, and just moves me along. And I'm a big guy, 6'3", 240-ish or something, 250 at the time. And the bed, my wife, everybody is gone within seconds. It was just like a flash, and all I see is these sheets and wires and a and a beeping sound from the monitor laying all on the floor. And I'm just like, what just happened? And it took me a couple of minutes just to kind of compose myself. I opened the door where they took her out of, and I said, hey, what's going on? Of course, they yelled at me, said, shut the door. We'll get to you in a minute. And by then, I'm just freaking out. I'm shaking. I'm having all sorts of anxiety. Finally, I got the nerve to stick my head out again. Nobody was looking, so I started walking down the hall, and I look right, and there's Tonie in an emergency room with all sorts of diagrams on her belly. And the doctor looks at me and I looked at him, and all I asked him was, I made a sign, is it up and down or is it sideways? Because Tonie was adamant about having a normal C-section so she can, still have a preserved, swimsuit body for it. And he goes, he kind of looked at me and stepped out. He goes, I'm sorry, but this is an emergency C-section. Your baby's coming out now, and we have no choice. We have to go and take the baby out. And in my head, I'm thinking, we have 2 more months. We have time. And he's like, yeah, time is not on your side. So luckily, whatever was going on with Amanda, she had adjusted, and her umbilical cord was growing outside the placenta. So as it was expanding, it was pressing on it, and it was cutting off circulation. So whatever was transpiring had stopped, and she was stabilized. So, which was great to us because we were able to wait for our doctor, her physician, to come in and do the C-section, which was important to us. But let me tell you, that 10, 15, 20 minutes was the longest day of my life, but it happened. I was in the emergency room. They allowed me to be in there, which was great, because an emergency turned out to be a non-emergency delivery after all. They stabilized her, and when you reflect and look at a horrible situation and in normal circumstances, I was able to be there for the birth of my first daughter, special needs or not. And that kind of began to put things into the okay motion again, right? Because, okay, now she's born. She's, she was making sounds and very active. What's next? So, yeah.
Well, she was quite small, though. That required a pretty extended stay in the hospital, from what I remember.
Yeah, she was 2 pounds, couple of ounces, 7 weeks or so and a half in the hospital. And, initially Tonie and I were there day and night. And then Tonie took a leave of absence and was there with Amanda for a good portion of every day. I think she only came home a couple of times here and there to kind of just take a break, take a shower, whatever, go get a haircut, and then went back to the hospital. We were on a rotation, but that was, wow, quite an experience. I mean, you see your child in the emergency room, and then in the NQ, and then special needs ward, and all the wiring and the tubes and the kangaroo care and all the other things that you have to start practicing. That was quite a gut check, but and truly a miracle. I mean, if I reflect back and say, gosh, why me? It's hard to say that because she's almost 24. We're blessed in so many ways that I could not have imagined it working out this well, reflecting on it back then. But that was, many thanks to our healthcare professionals, because we wouldn't be here without them, I don't think, Yeah,
well, thanks for sharing. I can't even imagine the anxiety that you must have had, or that Tonie must have had around that time. So how did the diagnosis transpire? When did it, at what age, and what were the circumstances?
Yeah, it was about, Amanda was almost 3 years old, give or take, where we were just not seeing the development. At age 1 or 1.5, they were still thinking that, hey, she'll have some delays, but she will at least, be active and whatnot. But she was just a slow crawler, a slow walker, a slow everything. So at some point, we actually had a therapist who was working with Amanda, who after a couple of sessions told us that Amanda, based on her professional opinion, would never be able to walk or talk. She'll be wheelchair bound. And that was a kick in the gut, where we both I think we drove home from the therapy session just speechless, because we'd bring Amanda home and she did everything opposite of what she was doing in the physician's office or in the therapist's office. She'd roll around and she'd make noises and get into her own trouble. But when we would take her there, she was basically still. And we've learned over the years that Amanda just is a silent watcher. She observes and then she reacts if she likes you. Otherwise, she'll just stay quiet. So we got a second opinion, of course, and we're told otherwise. And that's where we kind of began our really serious look at therapies. And and just having her work with specialists. But fast forward, I think at the age of 5 or so, 6, we took her to a specialist here in Elmhurst. And after some assessments and several days of testing, he basically said that her intellectual capacity will be probably around age 10, if we're lucky, 12. Fast forward, she's 24. We're seeing that he was pretty close. Yeah. So we've been managing that for the last, 13, 14, 15 years, give or take.
So it seemed like the diagnosis took place over an extended period of time. There were some delays when she was 1 and 2 years old, some of this evaluation when she's a little bit older with therapists and pediatricians, and then at age 5, 6, or whatever the age was, the mild retardation, and I don't know if that's when the Autism ADHD Aspergers diagnosis was made, but was there any meaningful advice that you got early on that helped you and Tonie navigate this sort of slippery slope? And it's not lost on me that the girls are just a couple, 3 years apart, so obviously I have a second child, her underfoot as well, so that only complicates the situation a little bit.
It does, and Samantha was full term, bigger than expected. I mean, she made up for everything that Amanda, didn't have when she was born. Full term, big baby, and ate and slept like a trooper. I mean, she was just, yeah. It really made you forget about the first experience for a little bit. But we listened to a lot of medical advice. We really did not have a support group, if you will, until we moved here to Wheaton. And one of the reasons we moved here is because Wheaton at the time had a really good school system, still does, for kids with special needs. There was a lot of families like us here. So then it became a little bit easier to kind of exchange stories and, hey, how do you do this? There were support groups that my wife was part of. It was interesting the first couple of years because, internet was just coming around and things weren't readily available, and all you had was medical books and healthcare professionals. Things are a lot different now.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. The world has changed a lot in the last 20 years. And at the risk of focusing on the negative, but just to be authentic, I'm wondering if you had to look back on those years or the years that have transpired, how would you articulate what the biggest challenge or biggest challenges have been?
It's hard to really go back and think because we were going to utilize all of our financial resources and time and everything that was given to us to experiment. And we did. If things weren't working out, we went to a different facility. We just kind of tried everything we could to give her a chance to be successful, right? Not to live our dream of having a healthy, normal child, but to give her that chance to be successful in life. And that's really has always been our mission.
Well, to focus on the positive, and I can remember you in a prior conversation mentioning that one of her strengths is her strong visual memory and her personality, and that she might not have been very verbal early on, but she seems to be making up for some lost time there as well.
Yes, Amanda will talk your ear off on a 6-hour drive to northern Wisconsin or on a 3-4 mile walk that we do regularly. She will make sure and cover what we're doing this weekend for a few miles so that she doesn't forget. But her memory and her visual recollection of things are just truly shy of amazing. I mean, I think I've shared this with you. I've had days where I'm just, it's an early morning, a lot has happened, and I'm driving Amanda to school, and for some reason I go right because I'm thinking she wants Dunkin' Donuts, but she didn't ask for her normal Dunkin' Donuts. So I turn right. She goes, "Hey, Daddy, where are you going? School's left." I'm like, "Oh, wait, you're right. We're not going right today. We're going left." And so she has these visual flashbacks that are just truly amazing, which is great. Sometimes if you forget to give her medicine in the morning, she'll remind you before you leave the house, which is great. And Tonie and I always joked about it that, the older we get, I think the more we want Amanda around because she'll be helping us take our medication someday, or vitamins. And that's kind of what puts a smile on your face, is that you see some of the things develop. Even though at age 24, there's always something new that we're discovering about her that are just truly amazing. So it's fun.
Well, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. One of the interviews that I did not so long ago was with a fellow down in Austin, Texas. Jose Velasco is his name, and he has 2 kids on the spectrum. They're young adults now as well. And he's been working at SAP, the large German software company, for decades, maybe 2.5 decades. And then for the last 6 years or so, he's led the SAP Autism at Work program. And it's most remarkable. They've hired well over 500 individuals. And what they all have in common is they have some level of autism. And their skills are perfectly suited for jobs at big companies like SAP. And it's like leading a revolution, right? Which is, in most cases, autism or Aspergers, et cetera, are thought to be as a deficit, right? Something less than. And what we're learning collectively as a society is that, they just have refined ways of thinking about things or doing things, right? Which might not seem conventional or typical, but they are perfectly suited to do certain things. So perhaps that's part of Amanda's destiny as well.
We're hoping. We're looking for those additional light bulbs to go off, because nothing makes a parent happier, and I don't care what category you're in, to see your children stand on their own 2 feet. And I don't mean that their first steps. It's the many steps that they take after. Seeing some of that progress, I think, for any parent is just truly, it's just a joy. We personally are struggling with that because Amanda still has a hard time differentiating between the safety elements of being on her own, but under supervision. She is a work machine. So much so that I discovered a hidden secret this summer, is that she loves to pull weeds, which comes in handy in my home garden. So much so that if I'm going outside to go to the garden, she goes, "Can I come and pull weeds?" And I have to be very careful because, a plant looks like a weed to her. But she's developing that skill. So I'm thinking maybe some sort of a landscape assistant.
Sure.
So I had to share that with you. It's something that just developed over the last month or so. And my wife and I are just, we have the biggest grin on our face because she puts on her gloves, she puts on her little work boots. She has this bucket that we use for weeds that she then takes to a bigger trash container. And she is just a workhorse. It's kind of cool to watch. I couldn't pay my younger daughter to do it. I tried once and she goes, "Oh, I just saw a spider. I'm out." I have video to prove it, by the way. But so it's becoming a joy to be together with her because she just is developing some habits that are, family centric.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing.
Of course.
Speaking of Samantha, the younger sister who might not be inclined to do the weed pulling, I'm sort of curious to know, what impact has Amanda's situation had on Samantha, or the rest of your family for that matter?
Yes, Samantha's coming into her own, and I know it not be embarrassing her by saying this, but it was rough. It was just rough because Amanda was a force to be reckoned with when she was little. She'd be, and that transfers to her cousins. Tonie's sister has 2 girls about the same age, and Amanda was the family bully. They come over, and Amanda liked to push people back then, especially little kids, and get a joy out of it because the baby then would start, or the little child would start crying, of course, because they were scared, not hurt, but just scared they'd fall on their butt. So we had a family joke that when Amanda would walk in, all the kids would sit down. And it's a true story. For years, it took us a while to develop some better social skills, but we go anywhere that knew Amanda at that age, and as soon as we'd walk in, they'd either run to their parents or sit down because they knew Amanda would eventually give them a little shove. So it was hard on Samantha for a while because it was hard on us. There's certain things that there's nothing on the internet that can tell you what to do in the middle of a night or late at night when your daughter's having a meltdown with special needs. How do you control it? You've had a long day, that you have dinner on the table and, sink full of dishes and, you're not having your best parental moment. All attention's on Amanda. As a family, we knew that. We talk about it all the time. But, Samantha's a very strong woman as a result of it. But if you were to pull her aside and talk to her individually, I can't imagine it being easy. And it's not that we ever, overlooked her. She had all the same opportunities that Amanda did. And we parented and disciplined the same way. But you just can't have a conversation without Amanda being in the middle of the conversation. So it just made it tough to really stay in sync. And unless you were outside the house and, doing a one-on-one, it was just really hard to have a family discussion. Even now to this day, Tonie last night and I were having a conversation. And Amanda wanted to go to bed. And every 5 minutes, I'm ready. Bedtime. And it just breaks the momentum. And so that's all I really have to say is that it broke the momentum of parenting and having a good time, because inevitably that good time would blow up because something happened because of Amanda's inability to sometimes control herself in an element that was new to us. Mm-hmm. So we sometimes didn't know where we would be getting into, even to this day, until we get her into that. And I will say this, that one thing that Tonie and I did from early on, as soon as Amanda was old enough to be going outside and not be at risk of any sort of health issues because of her weight, we would take her everywhere on trips, to the beach, to the zoo. We were always out and about. Families and friends, if she was having a bad day, we would just pick up and leave. We learned to put Amanda to be in a situation to be successful. That's one thing I will share, is that we've always put her in environments to just get her out into the public. So it's nothing new to her.
Yeah, well, I think the point you're making, if I understood it, Alex, is that, you didn't shelter her, right? She wasn't like always kept back, or you didn't treat her differently than you treated Samantha, and you try to do things as a family. And, you're exposing yourself, right? There's going to be moments of embarrassment and situations that arise that, maybe you just as soon avoid. If you got the longer vision in mind, which is, how is she going to get socialized, right? How is she going to adapt to the bigger environment that she's going to be living in for the rest of her life? So, it's almost like the old adage, pay me now or pay me later. And, if you're willing to make those small incremental adjustments or payments, hopefully everybody's better off as a result. So again, thank you for your transparency and authenticity. So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering if there's an important takeaway you can share with another dad or dads, and think about the younger Alex. Like, what would you be sharing with the dad who had a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old?
I would say accept what you've been given. Look at all resources, not just one. If somebody gives you one path, you should explore another, not necessarily for a shortcut or not necessarily for an answer, but just to give yourself and your child that fighting chance. There's just so much out there today that wasn't around, 20 some odd years ago. Don't feel any shame or guilt in this, really, and don't be afraid to ask for help. If you don't know something, or if you know another dad who's experienced what you've experienced, pick up the phone and talk to them, or go to special groups. There's help out there. You're not on your own. And I think I said this earlier, we were lucky to have family around that helped us, but I never really had that friend until years later that had a child with special needs, so I can sit around and ask silly questions. Hey, how are you doing this? Just to let me cope with it. And so that's my advice, is you're not in it alone. To summarize everything, you're not by yourself. There's resources and people around you.
Yeah, well, pearls of wisdom. Thank you for sharing. And this might be a good way to segue into, why did you agree to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
I've been looking to give back for a long time, and Tonie and I have in many ways in our community, but I feel that I can reach more people. Being a parent, a father, a husband, an in-law, a son-in-law, an uncle of a child with special needs, it's difficult because, in a way you're out there on your own. It's just you and your wife, or sometimes it's just single parenting. I just want to give back in any little way that I can, just to let people know that, hey, There is help. You're not alone. And it's interesting. I didn't share this with you, and it just popped into mind when a segue story. Tonie and I were at a restaurant one time, and we're minding our own business, and Amanda's having a moment, and we're of course not turning our heads, but we know people are watching. And a lady on the way out walks out and puts a hand on Tonie's shoulder, and she goes, "Things will be okay." And Amanda must have been like 2-3 years old, and to see Amanda at a restaurant back then was truly a sight, because she was very destructive, right? There's stuff all over. She's loud, and she walks by in a gentle little voice. She will be okay. You are going to see some miracle things coming out of this child. And then she kept on walking. We're like, who is this person? Like, why did she? It was almost, talking back about spirituality, it's almost like this, and we're having a moment because we're stressing, we're sweating, and this woman just puts her hand on her shoulder and just brings us to ease. Because turns out when we walked outside, she told us that she had a daughter with special needs who's older, and our moment gave her flashbacks, and now her daughter is living on her own and all these things. And so my message to anybody who's listening to this conversation is that it will be okay. You will find your way. Your child will find their way. And if you're ever stuck anywhere, find me, and I will do whatever I can to help you get back on track.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So let's give a special shout out to our mutual friend, Jim Vasilopoulos.
Yes.
Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast interviewee number 113 for helping connect us.
Jimmy, thank you. I appreciate you.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I just want to thank you for doing what you're doing. It's a true miracle. I'm great that we're meeting now. Wish would have met you sooner, but what you're doing in your mission in life is, again, one of those miracles that parents with special needs children need. So thank you for your support.
Well, thanks for those kind words. It's very humbling, Alex, to hear you say that. So if somebody wants to learn more about the experiences you've had or contact you, what's the best way about going and doing that?
So I am on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me there, in the public forum. Otherwise, my personal email is A for Alex, and then my last name, Lyu, B as in boy, ELSKY @yahoo.com.
Thank you. We'll make sure to include those in the show notes so it'll be easy for people to follow up.
Of course.
Alex, thank you for your time and many insights. As a reminder, Alex is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible donation? I would really appreciate your support. Would you please share the podcast, post a review on iTunes, and help spread the word? Also, remember to subscribe so you'll get a reminder when each new episode is produced. Alex, thanks again.
David, thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stCenturyDads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stCenturyDads.org.
The Dad to Dad podcast was produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks again to Ruben Law for supporting the Dad to Dad podcast. Call Rubin Law at 847-279-7999 and mention the Special Fathers Network for a free consultation. 847-279-7999.